So I want to get a sense of what you have done so far with respect to the lecture of the previous class, which was done on Zoom. But if you have attended over Zoom, or if you have watched the video that I posted last evening, or you haven't done either of the two, so you can go to menti.com and use this code 17420751. Okay, so let's move on and let's see a few other things. So I want you to type in the phrase or the word that comes to your mind when you hear the term resilience. So resilience is a term that we'll be using a lot. So tell us what you think, what comes to your mind when you think of resilience. Okay, so it seems like robust has been conflated with resilience, but robust in the system design terms, robust and resilience are very different. So those of you who have studied control theory, you must have studied robust control, but you do not study resilient control, right? So a robust, for example, an oak tree is robust, which means that you cannot easily force it to uproot it, right? But if you look at the mangroves in the Sundarbans, when a particular hurricane comes, the mangrove actually lowers its branches to survive through the storm, right? But it is not robust, but it is resilient. You can easily take out such, a plant from mangroves from its root, but in a something catastrophic, something very unprecedented, unexpected challenge, the mangrove does better than an oak tree. Oak tree can be uprooted by a storm of high potential, right? So resilience is the ability to withstand the unlikely or unprecedented disturbances such that you can recover by yourself quickly, right? Robust, it means that when you design something, it is said to be robust. When you design something to be robust, you consider a number of different scenarios which may occur to that system. And you have to design the system so that irrespective of all those scenarios, what the normal scenario is, nominal scenario is, and the other expected possible diversion from the original system's inputs, if the system still can function, then we say it's robust. Robust to noise, or robust to some spurious inputs, or robust to certain types of disturbances which we account for in the design itself. So robust, we create a product or system robust against certain already envisioned disturbances or already envisioned excursions from the nominal behavior. So that is what we call robust. Resilience is when we cannot imagine all the possible scenarios, especially very catastrophic ones. We haven't designed our system to withstand that, and then when that happens, my system should have enough ability to withstand, maybe with reduced functionality, but it should not completely collapse. And then when it comes back up, it comes back up like an elastic spring that comes back up by itself by gradually recovering its abilities or its functionalities. So when you design a city, for example, we try to make it robust against, say, rain. So we have rain water drainage system. We make it robust towards traffic, certain kind of traffic conditions. We create diversions and so on. But most cities today are not resilient. So you might know that there was a flood in Chennai a couple of weeks ago, and that flood basically tested the resilience, and it turns out that the resilience is not there. So everything came to standstill. Things didn't work for a while, right, until the disturbance was withdrawn by nature in this case. So that is the difference between resilience and robust. So when we design an enterprise IT architecture or enterprise operational technology architecture, we try to make the design robust against things that we can imagine might come to it. But when a crisis happens, if my system is not designed to be resilient to that crisis, the system collapses. So for example, if you have a ransomware attack on the IIT system, and the Pingla and OARS, all these things get completely encrypted, and there is no backup, and there is no process to manually register students or manually process the salary, then we'll say that such a system is not resilient, because I cannot work with reduced functionality. I have come to a standstill, and now I have to do a crisis management in a way so that eventually I can gain back all the functionalities, recover all the data. But that's a very manual, very strenuous process, and very, very difficult time for everybody, all the stakeholders, including students, employees, etc., etc. So that's what resilience, resilient design is different from robust design. Robust design we have been doing for a long time. We think about expected disturbances, and we accordingly respond to it. The system responds to it. And in case of resilience, it is much more. I have to be able to somehow withdraw certain functionalities, but I should be able to do minimal, act with minimal functionality during the disturbance. And when the disturbance goes away, then I have to recover really fast. And how fast you recover gives you a kind of a measure of who is more resilient, right? So that's the idea. So I have a repeated question here, that now you think about resilience in regular system design, right? So you think about design of a city, design of a product, or some kind of a IT system and so on. What would you think about cyber resilience? Now this is sort of like, I already spoke about cyber resilience, so this is kind of like a moot question right now, but let's see what people think. Okay, so firewall is not a part of resilience. Firewall is part of regular protection, right? Okay, so I think you got the drift on resilience. We'll talk a lot about resilience, resilient system design and so on for cyber security. So cyber resilience. So we'll move on to the next question. So here is something that probably after the course finishes, you should be able to get this better, but I just want to see the baseline where we are before we go into the materials. So here you have to push with your finger which one is more important and which one is less important according to you. Okay, so this is going along what I was hoping for, that it seems like majority of you think that people awareness and their timely action is most important in an organization for that organization security, right? So technology controls and processes for technology controls or processes that are to be followed are neck to neck. So they are almost equally important. But people, so cybersecurity is about people, process, and technology. So it's not just about technology, it's not just about firewalls and antiviruses or endpoint security or network monitoring or security operations center. Those are very important, but people are the most important. And we'll see how people come into picture in cybersecurity in more details later. So let's go move on to this thing. So I have 3 statements, and you have to decide whether it's true or false for all of them, each of them. So first question is, every employee has absolute right to keep weak or strong password. Second is, employees should have the ability to install any software they want at their devices, on their devices at work. And employees should have right to turn off device firewall. Okay? So it seems about 40% think that employees have the right to keep a weak password, right? And this is how IIT has operated so far, because academics are a very heady people. They think they have absolute right for everything, but in today's world, for a resilient system, you cannot allow that. That should be part of your policy, that what kind of password is allowed. You cannot have a password .123. You can have password which has at least certain length, which it should have certain special character, certain numerical character, at least one capital letter, etc. Now that does not make necessarily the full protection, because if you can easily do words like some name followed by 1, 2, 3 followed by star or pound and followed by a number, that will satisfy this condition, right? So many organizations actually have in the back end is a password strength checker, and it actually shows what is the strength of the password that you have chosen, and if it is weak, they don't accept it. They also don't accept passwords that you have used in last 3 passwords and things like that. And this is, the employees or students don't have any absolute right to choose their password as they please, because they are not endangering only themselves, they are endangering the entire community, right? So this is a matter of civics, right? So we have certain, constitution gives us certain fundamental rights and certain responsibilities, right? Rights do not come without responsibilities. So our cybersecurity policy of an organization must ensure that there is a password policy that is robust and that works for everybody. And if, so many years ago when I was a graduate student, so you can think about 1994, my password was cracked by my system administrators. We used to have these VAX mainframe systems, and we had accounts in them. And I was called into the IT office, and this is 1994, and she asked me to take a course before my account was restored, and my password was Bhaiya. And dictionary attacks, dictionary also has words from all languages, right? So dictionary attack can easily crack it, because passwords are stored in hashes, right? And in those days, salting of password was not common. So the dictionary process basically hashes all the words in dictionary and tries to match with the hashes that has been stored. So even though you do not know what my password was, but it had an alert that Sandeep's account has a hash, password hash that matches a hash of a known word. So they matched and they said, okay, Bhaiya is the password. So now suspend his account, call the guy and make him pay for it, right? So we should have that kind of enforcement mechanism to have this password, make sure people have strong password. But better yet, when we have two-factor authentication, but we'll go into that later. Now, the other issue is that when I worked for companies, like I worked for Intel and Verizon, I had Windows machine on my desktop, and I could not install any software without making a formal request for installing that software to the IT group. And the IT group will check that password, check that software, and only then will allow, if they feel that it is secure, it does not have, then that doesn't mean that they are always right. They might actually not detect a hidden backdoor in the software that I might be installing, but hopefully they have enough tools to check at least the well-known threats, and once they clear that, then only they will actually push the installation of the software from where they are into my machine. So they had the entire administrative control of my machine. And this is something that most organizations which are worried about cybersecurity and data loss, they will do such things, right? Similarly, the last one, employees should have right to turn off device firewall. So many people actually install some random software, and then the firewall is going to create problems. They turn off the firewall, right? Because they have administrative access to the machine, and thereby they become the launching pad for the malware, which will eventually go through the network, make lateral movement through the network, and then attack others' machines. So it's a community matter, it's not individuals matter, right? So everybody's machine should have visibility to the cyber operations center team. Everybody, what is happening in that machine, except personal data, anything, any program that is running, any network access that is being made into the machine or out of the machine, ports that are open, all this information should be real-time visible to the cybersecurity operations center screens, so that if something unusual happens, we can take action. So the idea that everybody has individualistic rights to do whatever is no longer valid in today's cyber world. It was, even I am talking about 1994, so 30 years ago it wasn't the case in US universities. So you can imagine now how difficult it is in US universities, how much control it is exerted, right? So you can imagine that in regular organizations like Microsoft, Intel, these are common things. Employees cannot say no to any of these. So having done this baseline understanding, let me get into the main topic. So first module was introduction. We talked about various kinds of threats and what cybersecurity is all about, what kind of attacks are happening, especially we focused on educational institutions. Now what we want to do in module 2, our job is to understand the attacker. So if you want to actually protect your infrastructure from attackers, you have to understand what the attackers actually do. How do they get in, and what do they do once they get in, and how do I see the common indicators of compromise. So indicators of compromise, where I should look for indication that my system is compromised already. And what happens is that attackers, such as countries like China or Russia, they do not expose themselves. Once they get into your system, they might sit there for years. They will create a persistence and will sit inside the machine or multiple machines forever until you discover them. Until then, they will communicate using your network to their command and control servers and probably bring more malicious payloads into your machines, waiting for an instruction from the command and control server to actually detonate whatever payload they have brought in. And they will do it based on many things, like, for example, geopolitical things, right? So, for example, in 2020, when we have border skirmish with China in Galwan, we were very afraid that the hidden Trojans sitting in many of our infrastructure, power systems and water treatment plant and oil and gas, China has already infiltrated them, and they will detonate any time. But the reason why those kind of attacks don't really happen is because it's an act of war. If you do that to a critical infrastructure of another country, basically it's considered an act of war, and then things will get escalated, right? Border skirmish among small number of battalions is something else, but if you declare a war, then it's a problem. So therefore, the Ukraine and Russia, when they are at war, they are having lots of cyber activities. Similarly, when Hamas and Israel are fighting, there are a lot of cyber activities, not only on Israel or US, but also on countries that are more aligned with Hamas. For example, there has been attacks on Iran in the last few weeks, attacks on the infrastructure in Lebanon. So this kind of things happen not necessarily overnight. There are threats sitting already hidden inside the infrastructure which are just detonated at the right time. So first people who came up with this a framework by which we can kind of think about what an attacker does was this company Lockheed Martin, and they had a very nice paper. I will share that with you on the canvas. This paper introduced this notion of cyber kill chain. Now, since then, this cyber kill chain has been improvised, and there are other more sophisticated kill chains have been developed. But to just get an idea, we'll start with the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So what is this kill chain? It's basically a way of thinking, right? So it's a way of wrapping your head around the idea of what the attacker might have done or might be doing, right? So that does not mean that the attacker is really doing it this way, right? But this is a theory, right? Like, for example, Newtonian mechanics was a theory to understand motion, but later on that failed when the idea of moving at the speed of light came about, and that led to the Einsteinian theory of motion, and that again failed in the quantum space. So theories are never necessarily the exact explanation of what happens in the real world, but it is an approximation, and that approximation may need to be refined as we understand things more, right? So think about cyber kill chain CKC that way, because don't get in your mind that this is the only way the attackers work. This is a theory first proposed about 15 years ago, and that has been since then refined quite a bit. So it basically identifies how adversaries work on our infrastructure, right? So and it basically says that there are 7 stages by which an adversary gets into my infrastructure, communicates back to its own command and control server, and then comes back, brings back more payloads and wait for commands from the command and control server, and then actually do the impact. So this is how they explained what actually adversaries do. So the idea is, now they made a big mistake. They made this thing that if it is a chain of events that the adversary needs to carry out, then if I can cut the chain at some point, then I can stop the adversary. So this is one of the weaknesses of cyber kill chain. They say that now I know that he will do first this, then he will do this, then he will do this. So if I can stop him in the first thing, I can stop him completely, or if I stop him in the second thing, then I can stop him at least, from doing more harm. So this is the way they think that if I stop at least one phase or one stage, then I can completely defeat the adversary. But that is not how it really works. Adversaries can do a lot of harm by circumventing many of these defenses and so on. So you have to take it in with a grain of salt, but this gives you an idea about how to think about what the adversary is doing. So this is intelligence-driven computer network defense informed by analysis of adversary campaigns and intrusion kill chain. So you will get into that. So this paper. So they say that there are 7 steps, right? So they say first step is reconnaissance, second is weaponization, third is delivery. We already discussed this in lecture 2 in another context, in the MITRE context, but this is CKC, which is much more simplified, which has 7 stages: exploitation, installation, command and control, and actions on objectives. So these are 7 stages, and I'll go into the 7 stages. So the defender's goal is to understand how these stages are carried out, and different adversaries carry out these stages in different ways. So not every adversary is doing it in the same way. So you have to understand all possible adversaries and how they are carrying out these 7 stages, and if I can do that, I will know how to look for it, that some stage is being carried out by observing events in my network and in my devices, and based on that I will try to stop them. So that's the idea. So we'll go into each of these. So reconnaissance. Now in order to, let's say somebody wants to attack IIT Kanpur network, right? How are they going to know how to even get in, right? So they have to first find a device which is vulnerable and exposed to the internet, where they can actually install something, right? Install some malicious first program, like not necessarily that malicious program doesn't have all the functionalities, because later they will bring in more payloads, but at least you have to make a foothold to the infrastructure, right? So you can do this by scanning the network with tools like Nmap. Many of you might have used Nmap, and if you say this range of IP and this port range scan using maybe TCP packets or UDP packets, and see whether any of the ports are open, and whether you can figure out, now this figuring out business has some complication related to, you can use machine learning or you can use signatures, but based on response you get, so you scan either by pinging or trying to send SYN packets, TCP SYN packets to all the ports. Now most of the ports are closed, right? We do not open all the ports, but most machines have, at least internet facing machines will have 443, which is the HTTPS port, that's open, maybe 25, which may be a STP port. So there are several ports that normally are open, at least on some machines. Based on the response you get from those ports, you try to match some signatures, the packets that you get, and figure out whether they're running Unix or Linux, or whether running Windows. If they're running Windows, what version it is. If they're running Linux, what version it is. And many times they will find it's running 1604 or 1804 Linux, or even 2004 Linux version, or Windows, maybe Windows 7, Windows 10, etc. And then they know that there are some weaknesses, or the application, they see the Apache web server version is running is an unpatched version. So what they will now do is that they will know how to exploit it, right? So they will send a well-formed payload or packet to exploit that vulnerability. Maybe it's a remote code execution vulnerability, right? Or they will look for your web applications that are exposed to the internet. So you have a web application and it has a form where you can type in things, or your username password field in the web application that you are running on the internet, and it does not, you have designed it in such a way it does not take the string that you are typing in, it does not take necessarily that it is not an SQL injection or it is command injection and things like that, if it is a very novice web application you are running. So as a result, what will happen is that they will figure out how to get into your system. Now, if your security is good and you do not have an unpatched version of anything, you have patched all the applications that are facing the internet, you have patched all the operating systems facing the internet, all the middleware facing the internet, and your web applications have been extensively tested for vulnerability by penetration testing, then the attacker will say, I cannot get in this way, so what I should do is I should figure out an employee who is in a good position, so therefore have high privilege, especially if it is an IT person or IT administrator. So they will figure out their emails and so on by, or WhatsApp number and so on, by doing various things, like many credentials are dumped and sold in the dark web. Many credentials are already leaked on many other data leaks. So they will find somehow somebody who is vulnerable that way and send a phishing email or phishing message in which they will have a URL which is pointing to a targeted a malware-laden website, so that he clicks on the link, he goes to the website and downloads the something malicious, or they can be sent a Word file or PDF file or JPEG file which is basically with embedded malware, and this is called phishing, or if it is coming through SMS it's called smishing, if it is coming through WhatsApp I don't know what it is called, but it is basically phishing with different names. And then that person is might click on the link or click on the image that he has received. Usually these are written, these emails or messages are written in such a way so that it is very difficult for the person to not open it. It might say, this is a bill for your thing, if you don't pay this, tax authorities are coming to you, something like that, like very, very personalized email. And with ChatGPT writing the, earlier we used to understand that this is a phishing email when there would be a lot of grammatical errors and a lot of spelling errors and so on. But with ChatGPT, they write impeccable emails, and if they feed more information about you, they might see your social media account and so on, LinkedIn account and so on, and then they see that, okay, this person is interested in this kind of things, and this person has this kind of roles and all that stuff, and they will write email, they will tell ChatGPT or BERT that write me an email to do this thing, for this, and this would become the problem, because then the person, even though you have very robustly designed your perimeter security, all patching and everything is done, but now you will have a person inside your organization who is not aware of phishing or not very careful, and then your first initial access will happen through that. Now, so that's the adversary's point of view, that I find somebody through which I can get into the system, right? Now, the issue is that as a defender, what would be your, if you want to cut the chain there, that the reconnaissance is not possible, right? Suppose you want to do that. What you do that, you will try to check, first, if you robustify all the applications and operating systems facing the internet and monitor the logs of all the accesses through those ports and so on, you are halfway there. That is, through those parts, your reconnaissance is not happening. Then you should also check whether your websites and where you have employee directory and all that stuff, the access logs those sites, and try to find patterns that somebody is coming and trying to download the directory and so on and so forth. For example, IIT Kanpur directory is accessible from outside, right? So if somebody wants to know my phone number, my office phone number, or my email, they can find it. Now, of course, I also have a personal website, they can find it, so it's not a big issue for me. There may be a person in the finance department who doesn't have a website or LinkedIn, but he can also found because IIT Kanpur directory is accessible from outside, right? So things like that. So we have to monitor the logs of access to the directory, and if we see that certain suspicious access from Russia, from China, from Vietnam, from North Korea or Iran, etc., we should look for those IP addresses, and then we should be careful. We cannot do much until the mail actually comes. So now what should we do? We should actually give training to every employee, student, everybody. Why? Because if even one person who is connected to my network opens a malicious attachment, he might compromise the entire network, at least the network he is connected to, right? He might not have full IITK network, but the part of the network that he has access to at his privilege level. Now, bigger problem could be that, as we'll see later, that the malware is designed to look for vulnerable applications on its victims. Victim may not have an administrator permission, so it may not do much harm, but there is something called privilege escalation. There are programs in your system, including maybe Windows systems program, which might have weaknesses which can be exploited to get a root access, right? So the payload may actually not only execute on the victim's machine, it can actually be administrator on the victim's machine if there is such a program running on that person's machine. And then once the administrative privilege, then he might have privilege to access databases, he might have access to go into another network, part of the another segment of the network, and so on. So this kind of things can happen. So therefore, employee awareness training is extremely important. Companies also do what is called a phishing drill. So they actually fake phishing. So they send phishing emails themselves, and when the employee clicks on the link or downloads the attachment, immediately the employee is redirected to a website which reprimands the employee, saying that, you know, you have a lack of awareness, now you should go through this document and understand what you have done is wrong, and so on. Moreover, what they do is, when people who actually click on that attachment or link, their list is compiled and they are called and asked to take a course. Moreover, next phishing drill, if somebody again does it from the same group, then more severe reprimand, more severe, more double the load of course that you have to take, and so on and so forth, right? So this is called phishing drill. So this is another thing the defender can do against reconnaissance. If the first kind, where you scan the network and figure out the weaknesses, the internet facing services and software, if that can be protected against by doing robust, patching and all that, then the next thing you have to do very vigorously is employee and all the users training, repeated phishing drills, and making them aware, and so on. Also, we have to do other detections tools, like, so we'll see that most companies now use detection agents in every device in the company, including the ones that you are using at home to connect to the company. So if the agent doesn't run, your VPN will not work. So if you turn off the agent, which is collecting continuously information from your device and sending all the events and all the logs, all the IP address connections and so on to the central security operations center, then your VPN will stop working. So it's designed that way. Doesn't make it foolproof, because if you're a good hacker, you might actually hack the VPN and make it work even when the agent is stopped, but at least one has to make that system robust, but at least the company is doing that due diligence required. So detection of browsing behaviors, of users, detection of, so for example, in the US, if you have a security clearance gives you access to national security related activities. You cannot say that on LinkedIn, right? So that if you will lose your security clearance, if you declare I have a this level of security clearance, then the adversary countries will make you a target, right? Because you have access to security information. So companies can impose restriction that you cannot write what exact position you are holding in the company, etc., etc. So there are a lot of things that the company policy, technology, and processes need to do in order to defend against this reconnaissance activities. Okay, so I will just introduce this and we'll take up here tomorrow. So next, once you have figured out how to get the foothold into the system and access into at least one device in the organization, then I want to now see what should be my payload, right? What payload I should, based on how I am doing the entrance, can have different types of payload or size of the payload and so on. For example, if I found that there is a remote code execution vulnerability in your web server, I have to do a little work. Exploit is a lot more difficult. But these exploits are also, you can buy in the dark web. So you actually go to the dark web and you have to go to the right forum. I'm not suggesting you do that. You should not do that. But there are forums, very much in depth dark web forums, where you can say that I want to get an exploit for Windows 11, this patch version. If there is an exploit, somebody will offer you for money, and usually they would accept money in Bitcoin or other things, so it's a little difficult to track them. So you do not have to even know how to write exploits. You can be pretty dumb and still do a very virulent attack, because you can buy them. So you buy them and then do the exploit. But if you are going to send the phishing, then it's slightly easier. The payload is easier because the user himself will click on it and start it in the organization. So the weaponization is the step where you say, I know how to get into that organization network, but now what should I put in there? Right? Should I put a backdoor so that I can keep connecting to the device and do my things, or should I put something like a Trojan which will do its own things and continue to report to the command and control server, or do I want to just get some money by doing a ransomware attack? So I will put in a ransomware. So these decisions and how to build that payload is a weaponization process, and this weaponization is actually done either the attacker themselves or by purchasing the weapon, the exploit from the dark web, or there are also in GitHub and all other places also there are tools like penetration testing tools such as Kali Linux or Rapid7 tools that can also be used by malicious people. Instead of doing penetration testing, repurpose it for attacking, putting malicious payload into the organizational network. So we'll start from here in the next class, because I just ran out of time and it will take some time. Okay.